Charlie Munger picked up the phone, his voice holding a tone Warren Buffett rarely heard, the sound of absolute, unshakable conviction. "Warren, we have to do this deal," he said, bypassing the usual pleasantries. "This guy is Thomas Edison and Henry Ford rolled into one. He's a genius, and if you don't invest, I'm doing it myself." The line went quiet for a moment, the weight of the ultimatum hanging in the air. Buffett, the most famous investor in the world, the man who preached about staying within his circle of competence, was being told to bet $250 million on a company he'd never heard of, in an industry he didn't understand, halfway around the world. The company was a Chinese battery maker called BYD, and its founder, Wang Chuanfu, was the man Munger was calling a modern-day Edison. The year was 2008, and while the entire global financial system was screaming in agony, Munger was listening to a different signal entirely, the quiet, humming frequency of a revolution that no one on Wall Street could see coming. To understand the sheer insanity of this bet, you have to place yourself in the fall of 2008. Lehman Brothers had just vanished in a puff of smoke, taking $600 billion with it. Bear Stearns was gone. AIG, the largest insurance company on the planet, was on life support, propped up by the U.S. government. The American auto industry was on its knees, begging for a bailout. Car companies weren't investments, they were toxic assets. And electric cars? That was a punchline. It was a science fair project for Silicon Valley billionaires and eco-conscious celebrities. The only name that mattered in that tiny, insignificant world was Tesla. Elon Musk, fresh off his PayPal fortune, was the visionary, the showman, the man promising a future of sleek, lightning-fast electric sports cars. His Tesla Roadster was a work of art, a symbol of American innovation that cost over $100,000. It was a toy for the rich, but it captured the imagination. Wall Street, when it bothered to look up from the burning wreckage of the mortgage market, saw Tesla as the only player in the game. All the capital, all the media attention, all the hype was focused on Palo Alto. Meanwhile, 6,000 miles away in Shenzhen, China, Wang Chuanfu was building cars that looked like cheap knockoffs of a Toyota Corolla. His flagship electric model, the F3DM, was a clunky plug-in hybrid with a pathetic all-electric range of just over 30 miles. It was frumpy, it was slow, and it was utterly uninspired. To the few Western analysts who even knew BYD existed, the comparison to Tesla was laughable. Tesla was building the future. BYD was building boring, derivative eco-boxes. The consensus was clear. Chinese manufacturing meant one thing: cheap copies. They could assemble iPhones, but they couldn't innovate. They could build toaster ovens, but they couldn't build a world-class automobile. The very idea that a company like BYD could one day challenge an American tech icon like Tesla was not just unlikely, it was patently absurd. It was like suggesting a regional shipping company could challenge the U.S. Navy. But Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger weren't looking at the car. They were looking at the man and at the engine hidden inside the car. They were applying a philosophy that had made them billions, a philosophy completely alien to the short-term thinking of Wall Street. They weren't betting on the shiny object. They were betting on the quiet, obsessive master of the machine that powered it. To find the source of Munger's obsession, you have to go back to 1966, to a dirt-poor village in Anhui province. Wang Chuanfu was born into a family of farmers. By the time he was a teenager, both of his parents had passed away, leaving him and his siblings in the care of his older brother and sister-in-law. His childhood was one of scarcity and hardship, a reality that would bake a fanatical obsession with efficiency and a hatred of waste into his very soul. He wasn't a visionary dreamer, he was a pragmatist forged in poverty. His only escape was academics. He was brilliant, a natural chemist, and he studied relentlessly, eventually earning a master's degree in battery chemistry from a prestigious Beijing research institute. In the early 1990s, the global electronics market was exploding. Mobile phones were becoming mainstream, and every single one needed a rechargeable battery. The market was completely dominated by Japanese giants like Sony and Sanyo. They had the patents, the technology, and the manufacturing expertise. They operated like a cartel, keeping prices high and innovation slow. Wang, working as a government researcher, saw an opportunity. He believed he could not only replicate the Japanese technology, but do it far, far cheaper. In 1995, at the age of 29, he borrowed $300,000 from a relative and started his own company in a small rented workshop. He called it BYD. The name Biadi in Chinese didn't officially stand for anything, but inside the company it was a running joke, a mantra: build your dreams. His strategy was pure guerrilla warfare against the Japanese giants. He couldn't afford their multi-million-dollar automated factories.
So he did something no one thought possible. He broke down the complex battery manufacturing process into hundreds of simple steps. Instead of using expensive robots, he used thousands of human hands. He designed meticulous, foolproof assembly lines staffed by low-cost migrant workers. It was a system born of necessity, a human-powered version of a Japanese high-tech factory. And it worked. His competitors laughed, calling his methods primitive. But Wang was obsessed. He would walk the factory floor for hours, tweaking a process here, adjusting a workflow there, shaving fractions of a penny off the cost of every single battery. He created his own manufacturing equipment because buying it from the Japanese was too expensive. He reverse-engineered their chemical formulas and then found cheaper materials to achieve the same result. Within 5 years, BYD had become one of the largest mobile phone battery manufacturers in the world, supplying Nokia, Motorola, and a host of other global brands. By the early 2000s, he had done the impossible. He had broken the Japanese monopoly and become the king of rechargeable batteries. But Wang Chuanfu wasn't satisfied. He saw that the same battery technology powering a flip phone could, if scaled up, power something much, much bigger. In 2003, he made a decision that caused his investors to panic and his board to revolt. He announced BYD was buying a failing, state-owned automaker. The move was universally condemned. The company's stock price crashed 20% in a single day. His own executives told him he was insane. Why would a world-class battery company want to get into the brutal, low-margin, capital-intensive business of making cars? Wang's logic was simple and profound, and it revealed his entire worldview. He told his team, "I know we don't know anything about making cars,
But they are 90% mechanics and 10% electronics. We can handle the electronics. The mechanics are simple. A car is just a pile of steel." To him, the car was merely a box to hold his real product, the battery. While everyone else saw a car company, Wang saw a battery company on wheels. This was the company that landed on the desk of David Sokol, a top executive at Berkshire Hathaway's energy division, in 2008. Sokol was a classic Buffett-style manager, no-nonsense, detail-oriented, and deeply skeptical of hype. He flew to China to meet Wang Chuanfu, and what he saw stunned him. He wasn't met by a slick, PowerPoint-wielding CEO in a fancy suit. He was met by an engineer in a rumpled shirt who immediately took him on a grueling, hours-long tour of his factories. Wang didn't talk about branding or marketing. He talked about chemical compositions, production yields, and cost per kilowatt hour. He could describe from memory the exact layout and function of every single assembly line. As Sokol later recounted, Wang was a technical fanatic, a man who lived and breathed manufacturing. At one point, to demonstrate that his car batteries used a non-toxic electrolyte, Wang poured some of the battery fluid into a glass and drank it. Sokol was floored. He immediately flew back and reported his findings to Charlie Munger. Munger himself, a man who values engineering and rationality above all else, was captivated. This wasn't some Wall Street promoter. This was a builder, a creator. In Wang, Munger saw the reincarnation of the great American industrialists. He saw Henry Ford's obsession with the assembly line. He saw Thomas Edison's tireless hands-on invention.
He saw a man who had built a competitive moat around his business, not with patents or brand names, but with something far more powerful, an unbeatable mastery of the manufacturing process. The ability to make high-quality, complex technology cheaper than anyone else on Earth. This was the clash of philosophies. Wall Street saw Tesla, a company with a visionary leader, a sexy product, and a grand story. Munger saw BYD, a company run by a fanatical engineer with a deep, defensible moat in the single most important component of an electric vehicle. While Tesla was focused on the top of the pyramid, selling expensive cars to the wealthy, BYD was focused on the bottom. Wang's goal wasn't to build the fastest or prettiest car. His goal was to drive down the cost of the battery, the single most expensive part of an EV, until electric cars were cheaper than gasoline cars. He wasn't trying to win a design award. He was trying to win a price war. This was the core of Munger's argument to Buffett. Forget the current cars, they were just prototypes. Invest in the man, invest in the battery technology, invest in the manufacturing process. On September 27, 2008, just 12 days after the collapse of Lehman Brothers, Berkshire Hathaway announced it was paying $232 million for a 10% stake in BYD. The news barely made a ripple. The Dow Jones was in freefall. The global economy was staring into the abyss. No one in America cared that a famous investor had bought a small piece of an obscure Chinese battery maker. Those who did notice were confused. Buffett, the man who famously avoided tech stocks, who preached about investing only in simple businesses he understood, like Coca-Cola and See's Candies, was now betting on batteries and Chinese cars. It seemed to violate every one of his own rules. For years, that's exactly how it looked. Tesla's star continued to rise, launching the Model S in 2012 to universal acclaim. It was named Motor Trend's Car of the Year, a stunning achievement. Elon Musk became a global icon. BYD, meanwhile, was struggling. Their cars remained uncompetitive, their designs were stale, and their profits were weak. The stock went nowhere. For nearly a decade, Buffett's $250 million bet looked like a mistake, a rare misstep from the Oracle of Omaha. The world saw a clumsy, inefficient car company chasing a market that didn't exist. They couldn't see the secret weapon being forged in BYD's labs, a weapon built from nickel, cobalt, and manganese. A weapon that, when finally perfected, would be aimed directly at the heart of the EV industry and change the game forever. For the next decade, the world watched a tale of two companies unfold, a narrative that seemed to prove Buffett and Munger wrong at every turn. On one side was Tesla, the darling of Silicon Valley. Elon Musk was a master storyteller, selling a vision of a sustainable future powered by solar panels and stylish, high-performance electric cars. He didn't build factories, he built gigafactories. He didn't make software updates, he sent over-the-air upgrades that made your car better while you slept. Tesla's strategy was textbook disruption, starting at the high end of the market where margins were thick and customers were less price-sensitive. The Model S and later the Model 3 weren't just cars, they were status symbols, technological marvels that made their owners feel like they were part of an exclusive club, pioneers of a new age. Wall Street loved the story. The stock price soared into the stratosphere, fueled by Musk's grand pronouncements and a belief in inevitable American technological dominance.
Tesla wasn't valued like a car company. It was valued like Apple or Google, a tech giant destined to change the world. On the other side was BYD. There were no grand pronouncements from Wang Chuanfu. He rarely gave interviews, and when he did, he spoke in dense technical jargon about battery chemistry and supply chains. BYD's strategy was the complete opposite of Tesla's. They started at the bottom in the unglamorous blue-collar world of commercial vehicles. While Musk was launching a car into space, Wang was methodically building electric buses for the city of Shenzhen. He was electrifying taxi fleets and sanitation trucks. It was boring, gritty work that generated no headlines in the West, but it accomplished two critical goals. First, it created a massive, stable demand for his batteries, allowing him to scale up production and drive down costs faster than anyone else. Every electric bus required a battery pack the size of 30 or 40 passenger cars. Second, it provided a real-world high-stress testing ground for his technology. Taxis and buses run 24/7 in all weather conditions, racking up hundreds of thousands of miles. This provided BYD with an ocean of data on battery performance, degradation, and safety, data its competitors could only dream of. This difference in approach was most evident in the core of the vehicle itself, the battery. From the beginning, the global EV industry had converged on a single dominant battery chemistry, NMC, which stands for nickel, manganese, cobalt. NMC batteries packed a lot of energy into a small space, giving cars a longer range, and they could deliver power quickly for thrilling acceleration. This was perfect for Tesla's brand. Range and performance were their key selling points. But NMC batteries had two massive hidden vulnerabilities. First, they were expensive. Nickel and especially cobalt are rare, volatile commodities, often mined in politically unstable regions under horrific labor conditions. Their prices could swing wildly, making it incredibly difficult to build an affordable mass-market car. Second, they were prone to thermal runaway. If an NMC battery is punctured or overheats, it can catch fire in a violent, almost inextinguishable chemical reaction. Viral videos of Teslas burning on the side of the road became a recurring nightmare for the industry. Wang Chuanfu looked at this problem not as an engineer, but as a chemist forged in scarcity. He hated the reliance on expensive, volatile materials like cobalt. He was obsessed with safety, a hangover from the early days of exploding mobile phone batteries. So while the rest of the world chased the performance of NMC, Wang placed a massive multi-billion-dollar bet on an alternative, overlooked chemistry, LFP, or lithium iron phosphate. For years, LFP had been considered the inferior choice for electric cars. Its main ingredients, iron and phosphate, are abundant and cheap, making the batteries far less expensive to produce. They are also incredibly stable and safe. You can puncture an LFP battery and it won't catch fire. And they have a much longer lifespan, capable of enduring thousands of charge cycles with minimal degradation. But they had one fatal flaw: low energy density.
An LFP battery was heavier and bulkier than an NMC battery with the same energy capacity. For a car manufacturer obsessed with range and weight, this was a deal-breaker. LFP was fine for a city bus or a stationary energy storage unit, but the consensus was it could never power a long-range, desirable passenger car. This is where Wang's true genius, the fusion of Edison and Ford that Munger had identified a decade earlier, came into play. He didn't see the LFP problem as a chemical limitation, he saw it as an engineering and packaging challenge. For years, his labs worked in secret, not just on improving the chemistry, but on completely redesigning the physical structure of the battery pack. The standard industry practice was to take hundreds of small cylindrical battery cells, group them into larger blocks called modules, and then assemble those modules into a final heavy battery pack. This cell-to-module-to-pack design was inefficient. The modules, with their own casings and wiring, added significant weight and wasted a huge amount of space. Wang's engineers were tasked with a radical idea:
get rid of the modules entirely. In March of 2020, after years of development and billions in investment, BYD unveiled its masterpiece. It was called the Blade Battery. The name was literal. Instead of small cylindrical cells, BYD had engineered long, thin cells that looked like blades, some over 3 feet long. These blades were then inserted directly into the battery pack, like files in a cabinet. This cell-to-pack design was revolutionary. By eliminating the cumbersome modules, they increased the space utilization inside the pack by over 50%. Suddenly, they could fit enough LFP cells into the pack to match the range of many NMC-powered cars. They had solved the energy density problem. But they didn't stop there. The blades themselves were so strong that they became a structural component of the pack, increasing its rigidity and the overall safety of the car's frame. To demonstrate its superiority, BYD staged a series of brutal public safety tests. The most famous was the nail penetration test, the industry's ultimate measure of thermal stability. They took a fully charged NMC battery and drove a steel nail through it. It immediately burst into flames, with surface temperatures exceeding 500 degrees Celsius. Then they did the same to their fully charged blade battery. The result was stunning. There was no fire, no smoke. The surface temperature barely rose above 60 degrees. Then they ran it over with a 46-ton truck. It didn't leak, smoke, or catch fire. Wang Chuanfu hadn't just made a better battery. He had created a new category. It was cheap, it was ultra-safe, it was long-lasting, and now it had the range to compete. The secret weapon Buffett and Munger had bet on a decade earlier was finally revealed, and the entire auto industry was put on notice. Simultaneously, the ground was shifting under their feet. The Chinese government, determined to dominate the future of transportation, had turned the country into a giant EV incubator. They poured hundreds of billions of dollars into consumer subsidies, charging infrastructure, and research grants. They mandated that a certain percentage of all cars sold by automakers had to be electric. This created the largest, most dynamic, and most brutally competitive electric vehicle market on Earth. While Western legacy automakers were still debating their EV strategies and Tesla was focused on selling premium cars, BYD was perfectly positioned to conquer this new world. Their product lineup, once a weakness, had become a strength. They weren't just selling 1 or 2 expensive models, they were selling dozens of them at every single price point. They had cheap electric hatchbacks like the Seagull, selling for the equivalent of $11,000. They had stylish family sedans like the Han, which directly competed with the Tesla Model 3, but at a lower price. They had SUVs, minivans, and even high-end performance cars. This was the power of vertical integration, Wang's master plan from the very beginning. BYD wasn't just assembling cars, they were controlling every critical part of the supply chain. They mined their own lithium, they manufactured their own batteries, they even produced their own semiconductor chips, a move that would prove invaluable during the global chip shortage that crippled their competitors. While other automakers were waiting months for crucial components, BYD's production lines kept humming. This gave them an unprecedented level of control over their costs and their destiny. They could build EVs cheaper than anyone else, full stop. The ugly, clunky cars from 2008 were gone, replaced by a fleet of sleek, modern vehicles designed by world-class European designers whom Wang had poached from Audi and Ferrari. The company that Wall Street had dismissed as a cheap copycat was now a self-sufficient technological titan. The announcement of the Blade battery was more than just a product launch, it was a declaration of intent. Wang Chuanfu declared that the Blade would be available for purchase by any other automaker. This was a strategic masterstroke. He wasn't just trying to sell his own cars, he was positioning BYD to be the battery supplier for the entire industry. He was turning his biggest competitive advantage into a new, massive revenue stream. Suddenly, automakers who had bet everything on NMC chemistry were calling BYD. Even Tesla, the company that had once seemed untouchable, was forced to acknowledge the superiority of BYD's LFP technology. In a quiet but seismic shift, Tesla began using BYD blade batteries in the entry-level Model Ys produced at its Berlin Gigafactory. The former punchline was now supplying the king. The power dynamic had fundamentally, irreversibly changed. The war for EV dominance was no longer about brand prestige or 0 to 60 times. It was about to become a brutal, global manufacturing war, a war of scale, efficiency, and cost. And it was a war that Wang Chuanfu had been preparing to win for his entire life. The tipping point arrived with the subtlety of an avalanche. While the West was still grappling with the aftershocks of the pandemic and supply chain chaos, BYD went into overdrive. Wang Chuanfu's decades of obsessive focus on vertical integration and cost control transformed from a competitive advantage into an instrument of total market domination. In March 2022, BYD made a stunning announcement. They would cease production of all internal combustion engine vehicles effective immediately. They were going all in on electric. It was a move no other major legacy automaker on the planet dared to make, a clear signal that the training wheels were off. From that moment on, BYD's production numbers began to look like a mathematical impossibility. In 2020, BYD sold around 130,000 battery electric vehicles. In 2021, that number exploded to over 320,000. Then came 2022, the year the world finally woke up. BYD sold over 911,000 pure EVs. For context, that was more than Ford, General Motors, and Volkswagen's EV sales combined. But even that astonishing figure was just a warm-up. The sheer scale of their manufacturing prowess was something the automotive world had not seen since Henry Ford perfected the moving assembly line. Their factories, which they called industrial parks, were entire cities dedicated to building cars. They didn't just assemble vehicles, they produced nearly every component on site. Raw materials would enter one side of the campus, and finished cars, ready for shipping, would roll out the other. They built their own seats, their own dashboards, their own electronics, their own glass. This extreme integration allowed them to iterate and improve their designs at a blistering pace, a process they called running in small, quick steps. A change that would take a Western automaker years of committee meetings and supplier negotiations could be implemented at BYD in a matter of months. This manufacturing machine was fueled by an army of engineers. While Tesla boasted about its software engineers and AI experts, BYD was quietly building the largest hardware engineering workforce in the industry. They employed over 90,000 engineers, more than 3 times the number at many of their legacy rivals. These weren't just designers, they were manufacturing process engineers, supply chain specialists, and material scientists, all laser-focused on a single goal, shaving another yawn off the cost of production. This relentless, grinding focus on cost created a phenomenon that left competitors bewildered. Every few months, just as another automaker would launch a so-called Tesla killer, BYD would slash its prices again. They initiated a price war so brutal that it began to feel less like a business strategy and more like an extermination event. Their most potent weapon in this war was a car that seemed to defy the laws of economics, the BYD Seagull. Launched in 2023, the Seagull was a small, stylish electric hatchback that started at just 73,800 yuan, roughly $10,200. It wasn't a stripped-down, low-quality penalty box. It came standard with a 10-inch rotating touchscreen, 4 airbags, and electronic stability control. Most importantly, it was powered by the same ultra-safe blade battery technology found in their more expensive models. It was a well-built, modern, and desirable car at a price point that Western and Japanese automakers believed was impossible to achieve without losing thousands of dollars on every vehicle sold. But BYD wasn't losing money.
Thanks to their vertical integration, they were building the seagull profitably. Automotive research firm Caresoft Global conducted a full teardown of the vehicle and concluded that a U.S. or European automaker would need to sell an equivalent car for over $20,000 just to break even. The Seagull wasn't just a car, it was a warning shot fired at the entire global auto industry. The impact was immediate and devastating, especially inside China, the world's largest car market. For years, foreign brands like Volkswagen, Toyota, and Honda had dominated. Suddenly, they were in free fall. Their electric offerings were too expensive and their technology felt dated compared to the feature-rich, affordable models from BYD and other Chinese upstarts. Showrooms that were once bustling sat empty. Market share that had taken decades to build evaporated in a matter of quarters. It was a massacre. BYD sales, meanwhile, continued their vertical ascent. They were selling hundreds of thousands of cars every single month. The scale was difficult to comprehend. In the single month of December 2023, BYD sold over 340,000 plug-in vehicles. That one-month sales figure was more than the company's entire annual EV sales from just 2 years prior.
This is when the world's attention shifted from BYD's dominance in China to a much more alarming prospect, their global expansion. For years, Wang's strategy had been to conquer the home market first, perfecting his products and achieving massive scale. Now he was ready to unleash his manufacturing juggernaut on the world. He started by building his own fleet of cargo ships. Frustrated by the high cost and limited availability of traditional car carriers, BYD simply ordered its own. The first vessel, the BYD Explorer No. 1, was a 7,000-car capacity behemoth, a floating symbol of their ambition. They weren't just exporting cars, they were exporting their entire vertically integrated system. This gave them a massive cost advantage in shipping and logistics, further undercutting their rivals. Their ships began arriving in ports across Southeast Asia, Australia, Latin America, and Europe. The pattern was always the same. They would enter a new market not with their most expensive models, but with high-quality, affordable cars like the Atto 3, an electric SUV that consistently won awards for its design, quality, and value. In countries like Thailand, Brazil, and Israel, BYD quickly shot to the top of the EV sales charts, displacing established Japanese, Korean, and European brands. They weren't just competing on price, they were often offering a superior product. Their cars had longer warranties, more standard features, and more advanced infotainment systems. The narrative that Chinese cars were cheap and poorly made was shattered by the direct experience of hundreds of thousands of new customers. In Europe, the heartland of the legacy auto industry, the arrival of BYD caused a panic. Executives at Volkswagen, Stellantis, and Renault looked at the price and quality of BYD's offerings with a mixture of awe and terror. They knew they couldn't compete. At the Munich Auto Show in 2023, the Chinese automakers, led by BYD, arrived in force. Their stands were bigger, their technology was more impressive, and their confidence was palpable. European auto executives walked through the BYD display with grim faces, looking at cars that were 2 to 3 years ahead of their own products in terms of battery technology and digital features, and were being sold at a 20 to 30% discount. The chairman of Volkswagen publicly admitted that they were no longer competitive on cost and had to work 3 times as hard to catch up. It was a stunning admission of defeat on their own home turf. All this time, the race with Tesla for the title of the world's biggest EV maker was tightening. Tesla was still growing, opening new factories in Berlin and Austin, but they were running into headwinds. Their product lineup was aging. The Model 3 and Model Y, which made up the vast majority of their sales, had been on the market for years with only minor changes. They had no answer to the explosion of affordable models at the low end of the market. Musk's attention also seemed divided, consumed by his acquisition of Twitter and his ventures in space exploration. Tesla, the car company, felt like it was running on autopilot, while BYD felt like a company at war. The final symbolic moment came in the fourth quarter of 2023. The sales numbers were released, and for the first time ever, BYD had sold more pure battery electric vehicles globally than Tesla. In that 3-month period, BYD sold 526,409 EVs, eclipsing Tesla's 484,507. The company that Wall Street had laughed at, the obscure battery maker from Shenzhen, had officially dethroned the king. The reversal of fortune that Munger and Buffett had quietly bet on 15 years earlier was now complete. Their initial $232 million investment had ballooned in value, at its peak worth over $8 billion, a staggering 3,500% return. It was one of the single greatest investments in Berkshire Hathaway's legendary history. But the numbers on a balance sheet didn't capture the full story. The real victory was philosophical. Buffett and Munger had bet on a different model of success. While the world was mesmerized by the Silicon Valley narrative of the lone genius visionary, they had placed their chips on the quiet, obsessive industrialist. They bet on manufacturing over marketing, on substance over story, on the slow, grinding work of process improvement over the fleeting excitement of a product launch. They had seen the future not in a sleek design studio in California, but on the dusty factory floor in Shenzhen. The dethroning of Tesla wasn't a sudden event, but the culmination of two fundamentally different worldviews colliding. Tesla's success was built on the power of the idea. It was a top-down revolution driven by a charismatic leader who sold a compelling vision of the future. Elon Musk convinced the world that electric cars could be cool, desirable, and faster than a Porsche. He broke the psychological barrier, transforming the EV from an environmentalist's compromise into a technologist's dream. This was a monumental achievement, and without it, the EV revolution might have taken another decade to ignite. But this approach had an inherent vulnerability. It was asset-light in the things that are hardest to scale. Tesla's core competency was in software, battery management systems, and a brilliant lean design philosophy. They outsourced the production of their battery cells to partners like Panasonic and CATL, and relied on a global network of suppliers for thousands of other components. This allowed them to be nimble and innovative in the early days, but it exposed them to the brutal realities of supply chain volatility and the high costs of relying on others. BYD's success, in stark contrast, was built on the power of the physical. It was a bottom-up revolution, driven by an engineer who believed that true sustainable advantage comes from controlling the means of production. Wang Chuanfu's obsession was never with the car itself, but with the entire industrial chain that created it. He saw that in a long-term manufacturing war, the company that controls the atoms, not just the bits, will ultimately win. While Musk was focused on the user interface, Wang was focused on the molecular structure of the cathode. While Tesla was building gigafactories to assemble components made by others, BYD was building industrial cities to create those components from raw materials. This philosophy is perfectly captured in a telling anecdote about the two leaders. When asked about his competitors, Musk famously dismissed BYD with a laugh in a 2011 interview, questioning their technology and design. Years later, when asked about Musk, Wang Chuanfu didn't critique Tesla's cars. He simply stated his belief that true innovation lies in mastering the supply chain and manufacturing process to make technology accessible to everyone. This clash of philosophies, the storyteller versus the industrialist, the software-first approach versus the hardware-first approach, is the central lesson of BYD's rise. Buffett and Munger, with their deep understanding of business history, recognized a timeless pattern. They knew that while visionary products can create a market, it is often the master of manufacturing who ultimately captures it. They saw the parallels to Andrew Carnegie, who didn't invent steel but perfected the process of making it cheaper than anyone else, thereby building the industrial backbone of America. They saw the ghost of Henry Ford, who didn't invent the automobile, but whose relentless focus on the assembly line put the world on wheels. In Wang Chuanfu, they saw a modern-day Carnegie, a man who understood that the ultimate competitive moat isn't a patent or a brand, but the institutional knowledge of how to make things efficiently at an unimaginable scale. The story of BYD also serves as a profound commentary on the nature of global competition in the 21st century. For decades, the West operated under a comfortable assumption. America and Europe would handle the high-value innovation and design, while Asia would handle the low-cost manufacturing. BYD single-handedly demolished this paradigm. Wang Chuanfu proved that the factory floor is not just a place for assembly, it is a laboratory for innovation. His company's breakthroughs in battery technology and manufacturing processes were not born in a sterile R&D center, but forged in the crucible of high-volume production, where every process is constantly tweaked and optimized. This shop floor innovation is a powerful, often underestimated force. The country that makes things develops a deep, intuitive understanding of how to make them better and cheaper, creating a virtuous cycle that is incredibly difficult for a design-focused, asset-light competitor to break. Today, the battle for the future of the automobile is entering a new, more dangerous phase. Having conquered its home market and established beachheads across the globe, BYD's final target is the United States. The American market is a fortress protected by significant tariffs, currently 27.5% on Chinese-made vehicles, and a deep-seated political desire to reshore manufacturing. But Wang Chuanfu is patient. BYD is now building factories in Mexico, just south of the U.S. border, a move that could allow them to bypass some of those tariffs under North American trade agreements. The prospect of an $11,000 BYD Seagull or even a $25,000 Atto 3 SUV landing in American showrooms is an existential threat to Detroit's Big Three. Ford and GM are already losing billions of dollars on their own EV programs. They have no economic model that can compete with BYD's prices without catastrophic losses. The challenge for Tesla is different but no less severe. They are caught in the middle. They can no longer claim to have the best technology, as BYD's Blade battery is arguably superior in safety and cost. They cannot compete on price at the low end of the market, which is where the vast majority of future growth lies. Tesla's path forward likely involves doubling down on what made them great: software, autonomous driving technology, and the power of their brand. They must become more like Apple, a premium product that commands loyalty through its ecosystem, even if it doesn't have the highest market share. But the days of uncontested dominance are over. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger's 2008 bet was more than just a brilliant financial transaction. It was a prescient insight into the changing currents of the global economy. They ignored the hype and focused on the fundamentals. They looked past the shiny object and saw the engine that powered it. They understood that in the end, revolutions are not just won by visionaries who dream of the future, but by the pragmatists who methodically build it, piece by piece on the factory floor. They bet on a fanatical engineer who was told he couldn't build a world-class battery, and he did. Who was told he couldn't compete with the Japanese, and he did. Who was told he couldn't build a car, and he built an empire. The story of BYD is a testament to a simple, enduring truth. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the one that matters most. Sometimes the real power belongs to the quiet ones who are busy doing the work, building the machines that will, in the silence of their relentless operation, change the world.